So hello and welcome to the second sabbatical log of the year, or at least the next three episodes of the Australia portion of my travels this year. Part one is going to be from Brisbane to Sydney, but the whole trip is a lot longer than that. So it's going to start in Brisbane, and we're going to drive down to Sydney. That's going to take a couple of days, and then into Canberra, which is the nation's capital, into Melbourne, and then from Melbourne, we're going to fly all the way up to here in Darwin, where we're going to visit two national parks, Kakadu and Nitmiluk, which have Paleolithic cave paintings. But we start in Brisbane, in which my wife has some family. So we actually got a guided tour from someone who was raised in the town, and it started off with some of the beautiful old sandstone structures, like you see in the All Saints Church on the left. This is an 1869 building, and it is surrounded on all sides by high rises. And this is kind of a tension within the place. You've got some beautiful old neoclassical and Victorian and Georgian era buildings, and people are trying to preserve those. And on the other hand, you have the fact that Brisbane is a vibrant city that is growing. To the right, you can see the Anzac Shrine of Remembrance. Anzac stands for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, and this is a monument to those who were lost in World War One. There's an eternal flame inside this sort of gorgeous Greek revival structure. It's a kind of wonderful thing to slip in and out of very, very modern architecture and this native sandstone look. And here's what I'm talking about with that tension. So this is an old power building that could have been torn down, but instead, the city decided to make it into an art and performance space. And so you can see that there's actually graffiti left on the walls, and the old outside of the power building has sort of been renovated with this glass and steel facelift. It's a great art space, and I wish we could have seen something there. A similar thing was done actually in Sydney, but it was not an art museum, it was a different type of museum space. Because we had a local guide, we got to try some local foods that I might not have delved into. On the left, you see dry aged beef, which really brings out a flavor, almost a little bit like organ meat. Most folks might not be excited about that. For me, it was phenomenal. And on the right was a breakfast that was challenging, but in the end, very, very good. Vegemite on toast that had been buttered. The coffee is something that we don't really do here, which is called a flat white. And it's sort of like a three-layered cappuccino. Super smooth, very, very good. Um, because we were able to in someone's home and they were able to cook for us. We got to try some really interesting delicacies that are local, and we got to see how they were prepared. So on the left is kangaroo, which we're told has to be done very rare. It's very low fat. It's actually like venison with a little less of that gamey flavor, and this is in a blueberry veal reduction. Really fantastic. To the right are the things that are called bugs. It's kind of a flat lobster. Sometimes they're called Moreton Bay bugs. And it's every bit as good as a lobster, maybe a little closer to the texture of a prawn, but really fantastic. After about 5 days in Brisbane, it was time to hit the road. And as you can see from the photo on the left, the road is a little more challenging. Driving on the left, pretty difficult. And so the trip that's going to take us from Brisbane all the way down through Melbourne and then a national park out that way is going to be over 2,000 kilometers. You can look that up if you're not used to it. but let's say it would flip your TripTak if you were also in miles. And it's been pretty exciting. So far, so good. I've got my fingers crossed while I'm saying that. Um, we actually wanted to see what road food looked like, and found a place that was called in Heatherbray. It was called Heatherbray Pies, and so we've got pies and chips over here. Not something that you would typically see in the States. Both of these are, of course, meat pies. So this is your not so fast food stop. When we pulled into Sydney, and by the way, it was a 2-day trip, we stopped off at a place called Port Macquarie. When we pulled into Sydney, I wanted to make sure that I went to the Sydney Opera House on that first day. It's just one of those iconic structures, and I had to see this thing for myself. I wanted to be sort of the first thing that we took as an introduction to the city, and it was phenomenal. We actually got the tour and tasting plate package, and so remember this little spot down here. But I mean, it was an absolutely gorgeous day, and as you can see, the Opera House is really, really striking against an otherwise very vertical backdrop across the bay of skyscrapers. This thing curves and bends like a set of shells. Inside, you have all sorts of devices that make this architectural marvel work. We're actually on the back side, out near the bay, and you can see from this viewing deck that there is, a steel ribbing that plays against natural local wood on the right, and with this absolutely incredible bay. Can you imagine getting out of a show, popping down the stairs, and buying something like a beer or a glass of wine, and looking out over that deck? Absolutely incredible. I'd love to be able to show you the interior theaters that we got to see, but we weren't allowed to take any photography in there because of copyright issues with the shows that were currently on at that time. Of course, getting the tasting menu, which was just a few bucks more, meant that we got to go down to that restaurant area where not only did we get a really fantastic sample of the different kinds of things that they serve down there, and that's my shout out to the Visual Arts Club, High Visual Arts Club, but we got to watch a pretty intense set of seagull fights. It was a fairly exciting afternoon. Great architecture, really good food, and great entertainment, seagull on seagull violence. A couple days later, we took a commuter ferry just so we could see it from different directions. With a building like this, which has these incredible curvilinear forms, again, 3 different shell sets, you want to be able to see it from multiple angles. So I'm going to toggle through these so you can see as we're going on this commuter ferry out, with it on my right side taking photos. You can see us go around this thing. It really changes as you move. And of course, it has a relation to the gardens in back of it, and the vertical buildings that you would see on the right side of the photograph. For a second day in Sydney, we decided to get out of the city situation and go to the Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park. This is a national park that is pretty close to Sydney. It was only about 45 minutes by car, and had some absolutely beautiful views. But what I was there to see was 2,000-year-old rock art pieces and engravings that were left by Aboriginal natives. To the left, and you can barely see it in there, is the most visible of the Red Hands from the Red Hands caves. And of course, these were made by a saliva, water, and usually mineral, in this case probably iron oxide, solution that's put in the mouth of the artist, who then blows it around their hand, which is placed up against the rock. We're going to get a chance to see some much older rock art, but this was our first chance to get in it and see some art out in nature. To the right is a swamp wallaby. This is an engraving about the same period. Very very difficult things to photograph engravings. So this was the one that turned out the best. There were people, there were some fish. There was even what appeared to be a couple who were stretching up with the moon over the top of them near this wallaby. But the swamp wallaby turned out best, so that's what's making it into the slideshow. We of course did a walking tour of Sydney as well. This is the Land Department building, which is a Renaissance revival uh, structure. Um, Again, a really big contrast between the copper domes, a different looking local sandstone, and then the backdrop around them of skyscrapers. To the right is a statue from a nearby building, and I just thought it was really interesting to see a white-looking tropical parrot on top of neoclassical sculpture. Of course, mimicking that Renaissance style. A very, very different sort of feel than I'm used to. And of course, in both cities, we went to the major museums and galleries where possible. This is an interesting piece from the Art Gallery of New South Wales. It's actually a series of tutini, which are grave markers, with bark paintings in back of them. And so we were exploring right away modernism and how Australia, in a very different way than the U.S., moves from the Romantic movement into modernism. It takes a little longer to hit. There's some cubism in the 20s and 30s and even 40s, and then somewhere in the late 40s and 50s, as modernism starts to really sort of take root in Australia, there's an interesting synergy with Aboriginal art, something that hasn't happened as well in and around the U.S. In my experience. And so these are some of the first tutini to be made. They're grave markers that would normally have a function, but are specifically made for Western eyes and viewership, made to be seen in an art space. The same thing is true of the bark paintings in back. And it starts very much with something that would be more like showing off native traditions in a modernist setting, and over a period of time moves into a very very modern feel. On the left here is Brooke Andrews' Loop, a model for how the world operates, and here he has abstract painting that's based on he is an artist of Aboriginal descent. Abstract painting that is loosely based on Aboriginal design, and he's integrated neon light structures into them. Really interesting dynamic unfolds over time here, and I'll get into this in future sabbatical logs, but the development is really quite intriguing. One thing that we learned, unfortunately, on this leg of the trip is that, of course, Australia being in the southern hemisphere, the seasons are flipped, and we're coming up really close on the December break, which would be the summer break. And so a lot of the galleries in and around the area are actually, they have portions closed, or they're renovating, or they're setting up new shows for the big summer season. So to the right here you see the GOMA, the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, under heavy construction. It wasn't the only place that we stepped into where a portion was being renovated or set up, but it was the best picture of the bunch, so I thought I'd throw that one in there. This is one of those things that you just figure out as you go, and yeah, you take the parts you get. So in the next sabbatical log, we'll be heading into Canberra, the nation's capital, and moving from there to Melbourne.